Good afternoon, everyone. Settle in, take a breath, and let your minds tune themselves to story. Today's session is one of those turning points in your craft where the pieces finally click, the moment when dialogue stops being characters talking and becomes the engine that drives emotion, tension, and truth. Before we dive in, make sure you like the session, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming masterclasses. We're building something big here, and I want you with me for every step. Today you're going to learn how dialogue and scene building fuse together to create moments that feel painfully real and deeply cinematic. We'll be working directly with the intense passage you provided from Rubin's narrative, a scene steeped in shock, exhaustion, trauma, relief, and the strange rhythms of people who come from different worlds yet collide in the same moment of danger. Dialogue, when stripped down to its essence, is a psychological seismograph. It records the tremors inside a character's mind, and scene building in the air, the textures, the movements, the sound cues, gives that inner tremor a physical shape. When both elements are aligned, the narrative becomes alive. Today we'll dissect this alignment with the precision of surgeons. You'll see how Rubin's broken. Stuttering speech teaches us about natural dialogue, the kind pulled straight, from the body rather than the brain. You'll see how Viktor's words act as psychological scaffolding, supporting the protagonist even when the plot itself is collapsing around him. And you'll see how the Iranian Looties, with their silence, scars, and simple declarations, demonstrate the power of cultural rhythm. How different groups speak with different cadences, revealing identity without slipping into stereotype. We're also going to examine how the writer anchors speech in actions and sensory details. When Rubin says nothing and merely nods, that silence is a line of dialogue. When the Indian woman holds him, touches his hair, and says almost nothing at all, that embrace communicates more than an entire paragraph ever could. When the Iranian leader shouts 300,000 euros each in the middle of a rescue mission, the whole scene tilts, and suddenly greed, danger, and dark humor rise to the surface. Everything you'll learn today comes directly from the passage. We are not speaking in theory. We are studying a living example of dialogue and scenecraft done with emotional force and narrative intelligence. By the end of this class, you will understand the difference between natural and expository dialogue, how to weave speech together with movement, physical touch, breath, and tension, how subtext transforms a simple line into a psychological revelation, how silence, nods, and broken sentences become some of the strongest tools you have, and how to make a scene feel like it is happening, not just around a character, but inside them. And after all that, I'll give you a sharp, elegant writing exercise. A dialogue-only rescue scene. No description. No narration, no action beats. Just words, which means the emotion, the environment, and the tension must hide inside the lines themselves. It's a fantastic way to train precision. All right, let's begin the masterclass. Conversation, after all, is where characters reveal who they really are. And today, we're going to learn how to make them speak like they're alive. I nodded, unable to speak. My entire being, caught between reality and nightmare, was paralyzed. Viktor immediately came to my aid. Behind him, the expert woman also appeared, her gaze filled with concern. Both helped me. Taking my arms and with great difficulty, I left the cursed room. Viktor, his voice carrying a calming reassurance that felt like mountains, lifting from my shoulders, said, "It's all over now." My voice trembled. "My world is over, Viktor. I'm grateful you're here and that you saved the expert woman, but it's too late for me. Let me stay here. I'm even finished for myself. My soul is dead. I insisted they leave me. Let me drown in the same darkness and emptiness that had consumed me." Then suddenly, at the peak of my despair and restlessness, a familiar sound sent a shiver through my body. It was the scream of a woman, whose heart ached for me with concern. A voice so familiar, yet in that moment, its sound seemed impossible. It was the Indian woman's voice. She was alive, and I was in absolute shock. My brain was incapable of processing this flood of contradictory information. I was so shocked that I couldn't even bring myself to ask what that gunshot had been. Reality had so far exceeded my imagination that words simply withered in my throat. Even asking a simple question was impossible. The Indian woman, seeing my state, didn't hesitate. She came forward and embraced me tightly. She gently stroked my dirt-laden hair, tenderly pushing the soil from my locks, and said with a choked but resolute voice, "It's truly all over." Meanwhile, the expert woman was talking to the Iranians. They were strange people, all burly and muscular, some with long beards, some clean-shaven, but without exception, all were rough. They all had tattoos, but not like the ones we saw in Germany that were for beauty. These tattoos were clearly amateurish, etched onto their bodies with crude lines and without design or pattern, and my gut feeling told me these tattoos weren't for aesthetics, but perhaps a mark of a specific identity or a hidden pact. All of them, without exception, bore the scars of deep and serious wounds on their hands and in faces, evidence of countless skirmishes. The Indian woman, who had seemingly vanished for a few minutes, returned with several bottles of mineral water. I drank greedily, feeling my spirit return to my body, but still I couldn't ask any questions. I just gestured with my eyes towards those strange men and their scars. The expert woman smiled, a smile that seemed to hold a hidden bitterness, and said, "In Iran, these are called Arazel-o-Obash, thugs and hooligans, at least from the perspective of the Iranian government and some of the people. But they define themselves as Lootie Amarafat, honorable ruffians, though I don't know the meaning of Lootie." We went outside the caravanserai. 4 black Toyota Prados were waiting, with 10 Iranian men. It was decided that 2 of the Iranians would take the Indian woman to the nearest town so she could report to the police. Then, several chests were brought out, seemingly found in the Khan's room. Chests filled with priceless antiquities and extraordinary ancient artifacts. The Iranians looked at the antiquities with eager anticipation. Viktor was talking to Salvador on a satellite phone, and then the leader of the Iranians spoke to someone next to Salvador. It was clear they were discussing the valuable spoils. And finally, the Iranian man loudly declared to everyone, 300,000 euros each. From my perspective, with years of working alongside Salvador, 1,000 euros for each Iranian, which, considering their number, amounted to 3 million euros in total, was nothing compared to all those thousands of years old ancient artifacts. The chests contained 3 large boxes, at least 100 pieces of gold vessels and goblets, and many gold statues. I'd seen single, exquisite 3,000-year-old gold goblets at major auctions go for millions of dollars, sometimes even tens of millions, depending on their provenance, craftsmanship, and historical significance. A collection like this, with so many pieces, would easily fetch tens of millions of euros, if not more, on the black market. Only 2 mysteries remained in my mind. I knew the first would soon be solved, Viktor's fate and our place in this equation. But I didn't dare to even think about the second mystery or ask about it. What had happened to those Pakistanis, especially those 2 cannibal brothers? We headed towards the border. The next day, I was in Iran, under treatment, from the depths of nightmare to a glimmer of hope. The rescue unveiled, Rubin's narrative to Maria. Rubin took a deep breath, his voice still trembling from weakness and shock. Those days, I was hospitalized in Tehran's largest hospital, right next to Malad Tower. From my room window, I'd look at that towering structure and tell myself, before this trip, I saw myself like this tower, soaring high, full of pride. But now I am so utterly ruined that I can't even talk to Anna. The only thing that kept a flicker of hope alive in my heart was the Indian woman being alive. This gave me hope that I could return to life, that perhaps not everything was over. I was lost in my thoughts when my room door opened and Viktor walked in. Seeing him, a glimmer of excitement surged through me. I immediately asked, "Viktor, what happened? How did this miracle come about?" Viktor took a deep breath, his tone a mix of exhaustion and pride. "Well, we work for someone who always has foresight and never acts without a plan. Salvador had prepared this team before we even arrived in Iran." I asked, surprised, "How so?" He continued, "Well, you know Salvador deals with major traders in Iran. Through one of those traders, who resides in Germany, Salvador managed to enlist this Iranian team. They were in the border town a day before our arrival, and most of them were stationed inside Pakistani territory. I asked, "Viktor, why didn't Salvador tell us anything?" Viktor shook his head. "Because if we had known, we would have definitely exposed the team. We wouldn't have acted naturally, and the antiquities smugglers would have surely figured it out. When you entered Pakistani territory, they were like shadows, following you to figure out your destination. But along the way, the Iranian team, to avoid raising suspicion with the Pakistanis, had to maintain a distance, which led to the pursuit being unsuccessful. However, with the kidnapping of the expert woman by the smugglers, this time the Iranians managed to find their center, that caravanserai." Viktor paused, his tone becoming more serious. But the situation was very delicate. There were 10 armed Pakistani men with Kalashnikovs, while the Iranians only had Qameh with them. I asked, puzzled, "What's a Qameh?" He explained, "The short swords you saw in their hands. They are dangerous men, Rubin. But Salvador's strategy worked." I asked, "I heard a gunshot just before you arrived." Viktor said, "I heard it too, but I don't know what it was for. I just prayed they hadn't shot you." Hearing that, my heart clenched. "Viktor, I was worried about the Indian woman and thought they had killed her," Viktor said with certainty. "When we parked the cars far away so they wouldn't notice us, we were observing the caravanserai's men closely. Suddenly, a motorcycle arrived and returned a few minutes later. But 7 other armed men left with it. It seemed they had encountered some problem, as if they needed backup. This was the perfect opportunity. With the reduction in armed personnel, we infiltrated through the unprotected areas and hid in the deserted rooms. After assessing the situation, the 3 armed men were quickly disarmed, and then we found 5 more in another room. We tied them all up, covered their mouths, and moved them to the cellar. I asked, "Viktor, no one was actually killed?" He smiled. "No, because the Iranians didn't see a need to kill anyone, as no actual conflict broke out. In case of a conflict, it's natural for both sides to suffer casualties. But with those armed men gone, there was no need for a direct confrontation." Then Viktor laughed, a laugh that held both fatigue and triumph. The interesting part of the story is that when Roland saw the pictures of all those antiquities and estimated their value at 20 million euros, he demanded a 10 million euro share, or half of the antiquities, from Salvador. But Salvador firmly rejected Roland's demand. He winked and continued, "And now I have good news for you. Remember when we went to rent that apartment? The one that was for sale, but we went to rent it, each unit costing 1.5 million euros. My eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, why?" He said with a triumphant smile. "Salvador bought 2 units for us. In essence, this is our share from this trip. And those antiquities." I was in shock from this sweet news when suddenly Anna made a video call. She was in the new apartment and was badgering me about we have to throw away all the old furniture. What should we buy? What's suitable for wear? Life, with all its madness and horror, was strangely continuing, and hope, however small, had once again taken root in my heart. From the depths of nightmare to a smile of life. The end of the Pakistan chapter, Rubin's narrative to Maria. Rubin took a deep breath, looking distantly at Maria. Those days, I was hospitalized in Tehran's largest hospital, right next to Malad Tower. From my room window, I'd stare at that towering structure and tell myself, before this trip I saw myself like this tower, soaring high, full of pride. But now I'm so utterly ruined that I can't even talk to Anna. My body and soul were still wounded, and the only thing that kept a flicker of hope alive in my heart was the Indian woman being alive. This gave me hope that maybe I could return to life, that maybe not everything was over. I was lost in thought when my room door opened and Viktor walked in. Seeing him, a glimmer of excitement surged through me. Without hesitation, I asked, "Viktor, what happened? How did this miracle come about?" Viktor took a deep breath, his tone a mix of exhaustion and pride. "Well, we work for someone who always has foresight and never acts without a plan. Salvador had prepared this team before we even arrived in Iran." I asked, surprised, "How so?" He continued, "Well, you know, Salvador deals with major traders in Iran. Through one of those traders, who resides in Germany, Salvador managed to enlist this Iranian team. They were in the border town a day before our arrival, and most of them were stationed inside Pakistani territory." I asked, "Viktor, why didn't Salvador tell us anything?" Viktor shook his head. "Because if we had known, we would have definitely exposed the team. We wouldn't have acted naturally, and the antiquities smugglers would have surely figured it out. When you entered Pakistani territory, they were like shadows, following you to figure out your destination. But along the way, the Iranian team, to avoid raising suspicion with the Pakistanis, had to maintain a distance, which led to the pursuit being unsuccessful. However, with the kidnapping of the expert woman by the smugglers, this time the Iranians managed to find their center, that caravanserai." Viktor paused, his tone growing more serious. But the situation was very delicate. There were 10 armed Pakistani men with Kalashnikovs, while the Iranians only had Kameh with them. I asked, puzzled, "What's a Kameh?" He explained, "The short swords you saw in their hands. They are dangerous men, Rubin, but Salvador's strategy worked." I asked, "I heard a gunshot just before you arrived." Viktor said, "I heard it too, but I don't know what it was for. Good afternoon, class. Today we explore one of the most structurally complex sections of Rubin's Nightmare, a stretch of pages that executes a difficult triple task: resolving a major horror sequence, transitioning into an action-driven rescue, and simultaneously planting the seeds of emotional renewal. Pages 23 to 28 represent a decisive turning point in the narrative where fear, despair, and relief collide in a way that pushes the protagonist toward a new psychological phase. What these pages accomplish, if we strip them down to pure craft, is a sophisticated interplay between character, psychology, dramatic pacing, and thematic transformation. Let's unpack how this works. 1. The anatomy of collapse, a study in psychological realism. The section begins with Rubin in an almost catatonic state. His voice is dry and lifeless, and he repeatedly insists that Viktor should leave me here because his soul is dead. Notice how this isn't melodrama. It's a dramatized psychological consequence. A trauma scene only works if the emotional logic is airtight. Rubin has just survived captivity, witnessed horrors he cannot yet name, and experienced a level of helplessness that shattered his self-concept. His insistence on being left behind is a very human response. Trauma survivors often reject rescue because the trauma has robbed them of worthiness. The writer uses physical disintegration, bloody face, dirt in the hair, wobbly steps, as externalization of internal collapse. This is good practice for any writer. Show the mind through the body. Notice how Viktor takes his arms, but Rubin insists on staying. The tension between physical, assistance, and psychological resistance keeps the scene alive. Then the scream, the Indian woman's voice, functions as a narrative defibrillator. Physiologically, Rubin is frozen. Emotionally, he's in shock. Dramatically, the scream jolts both him and the reader. It's an example of external stimulus used as internal ignition. Suddenly, something in him flickers. Plot and psychology merge into one movement. 2. Humanizing horror, the reunion as a counterweight. The embrace between Rubin and the Indian woman is crucial. It softens the rawness of the page with something profoundly human. Torture narratives can easily fall into voyeurism. This scene avoids that by giving us emotional reciprocity. She comforts him. She strokes the dirt from his hair. She tells him, it's truly all over. This is the shift from horror to healing. As a narrative instructor, I encourage you to notice how timing works here. Relief comes not immediately, not prematurely, but at the exact moment Rubin's psyche is about to fracture beyond return. Structurally, you should think of this as the emotional midpoint of the sequence. The protagonist hits absolute zero, then a human connection pulls him upward. Good fiction respects the elasticity of human emotion. The world building through perspective. The Iranian Looties. Immediately after this tender exchange, the narrative introduces a completely different energy. The entrance of the Iranian rescue team. Their presence serves multiple purposes. 1. World building. Their tattoos, scars, and makeshift weapons paint a subculture. 2. Contrast. Their roughness clashes with Rubin's fragility. 3. Moral complexity. They define themselves as Lootie b'marifat, honorable ruffians. This dual identity gives the story cultural depth. These men exist between criminality and heroism, an archetype often explored in Iranian oral tradition. Bringing them in right after. Rubin's psychological collapse creates a tonal pivot. We move from claustrophobic horror to a rough, masculine, almost folkloric energy. The key craft point here, introducing a new social group at a moment of relief, widens the narrative lens. The story stops being a psychological tunnel and becomes a geopolitical mosaic involving Germans, Pakistanis, and Iranians. This enlarges the stakes. It also prepares the reader for a transition from personal terror to organized intervention. 4. The treasure revelation. Escalating stakes after emotional exhaustion. The introduction of the gold-filled chests is not merely an action beat. It serves a structural purpose. After an intense horror sequence, some writers fall into the trap of letting tension fall too low. Here, however, the presence of priceless antiquities, worth tens of millions, injects new energy. This is not random. It fulfills a classical structural move. Raise external stakes as internal stakes soften. Rubin is recovering emotionally, but now the political, economic, and ethical layers resurface. Viktor negotiating with Salvador over the satellite phone introduces a form of tension reinflation. It tells the audience, the nightmare is not over. It's merely evolving. The Iranian leader announcing 300,000 euros each works as a moment of dark humor, greed, and realism. That line is purposeful. It shows the rescue team weren't there out of charity alone. In morally gray adventures, rescue and exploitation often coexist. The story embraces that complexity instead of sanitizing it. 5. Crafting relief. Without weakening tension. Rubin in the hospital. The Tehran hospital sequence is an excellent example of controlled decompression. After such sustained psychological and physical stress, a story needs room to breathe. But the writer does not let the relief become flat. How? Rubin is safe, but emotionally paralyzed. He looks at Malad Tower and compares his former pride to his current ruin. This image is symbolic but grounded. It crystallizes the theme. Trauma can destroy even the strongest self-image. Then Viktor enters, bringing levity and revelation. The Iranian team had been like shadows, following Rubin without his knowledge. This retroactive explanation serves two structural functions. All right, writers, gather close. Today's session is one of the most decisive turning points in your growth as storytellers. Dialogue is the bloodstream of narrative. Scene building is the skeleton, and when the two move together, the story breathes like a living organism. In this lecture, we will explore Session 6, Dialogue and Scene Building, using the passage you've provided as our working laboratory. This segment from Rubin's ordeal is a marvelous specimen. Emotionally charged, structurally complex, and rich with lessons in natural speech, physical beats, sensory layering, and psychological subtext. Let's peel it open and study how the machinery works. Session 6, Dialogue and Scene Building Masterclass. Using Rubin's Rescue, pages 23-28, as a case study. When we talk about dialogue, students often imagine people simply talking. But in fiction, talking is the least interesting thing characters do. What matters is what the dialogue reveals, what it hides, and how it collides with context, action, and emotion. Your provided text contains a perfect storm of these elements. A broken protagonist, a tense rescue, conflicting emotions, culturally distinct groups, and the aftermath of trauma. Let's dive in. 1. Natural dialogue versus expository dialogue. The first thing you must learn is to distinguish the two tones of speech a story can carry. Natural dialogue. Dialogue that rises organically from the character's emotional state. It is shaped by fear, shock, exhaustion, desire, or confusion. Expository dialogue. Speech whose job is to deliver information, backstory, world building, plot updates, or explanations. Both are essential. Both can be dangerous if misused. Your passage demonstrates both forms with clarity. A. Natural dialogue. The language of trauma. Rubin's early lines are pure, unfiltered psychological truth. My world is over. My soul is dead. These are not informative sentences. They tell us nothing about the plot, but they reveal everything about Rubin's internal devastation. Natural dialogue exposes the emotional temperature of a character. Notice Viktor's response. It's all over now. This is not true objectively, but it is emotionally necessary. His line is a human response, not a factual one. Natural dialogue answers feeling with feeling. This is a key lesson. Natural dialogue follows the emotional logic of the moment, not the factual logic. Be expository dialogue, revealing the invisible. Later in the text, Viktor explains how the Iranians followed them, how Salvador coordinated the rescue, why the plan was secret, and how the smugglers were disarmed. These lines are heavy with information. When you entered Pakistani territory, they were like shadows. Salvador had prepared this team before we even arrived in Iran. These moments function as narrative explanation. They fill in gaps. They prevent the rescue from feeling miraculous or unearned. But notice something important. Exposition arrives after the emotional climax, never during the panic, never during the escape. This is excellent structure. During high-stress events, characters speak briefly, instinctively, or not at all. Exposition belongs in the cooling phase. The hospital, the recovery, the emotional decompression. That is how you balance the two types of dialogue without breaking immersion. 2. Combining action, sensation, and speech. Dialogue floats unless anchored in physical behavior. A character's body speaks louder than their mouth. Your passage offers vivid examples. Rubin's body is a wreck, tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, voice lifeless, frozen in shock, unable to ask questions, staring empty-eyed, like a soul separated from its body. His speech reflects this brokenness, short, ashamed, self-destructive lines. Viktor and the expert woman's actions are equally important. Lifting Rubin by the arms, steadying him, guiding him out. These gestures soften the moment. They become unspoken dialogue. Then the Indian woman appears, and instead of speaking first, she embraces him and touches his dirt-covered hair. That physical action has the weight of a paragraph of dialogue. A cinematic writer does not describe emotion. They stage it. This is the core technique. Every spoken line should be anchored in an action or a sensory beat. Dialogue grows stronger when wrapped in body language. Texture, temperature, breath, and touch. Let's examine one example. Are you good? Rubin cannot speak. He nods. This micro-exchange is perfect. Minimal words. Maximum meaning. The silence carries the weight. Learning to trust silence is a mark of a mature writer. 3. Emotional subtext. The real conversation beneath the words. Dialogue is rarely about what is said. It is about what is felt. Here are several layers of subtext in your passage. Rubin's subtext. He feels guilty for surviving. He feels unworthy of rescue. He believes he is broken beyond repair. He is frightened of hope returning. When he says, "Leave me here," he means, "My shame is heavier than my body." Viktor's subtext. He feels responsibility for Rubin. He is masking fear with calm reassurance. He must keep Rubin psychologically alive. His "it's all over now" is not reassurance. It is a survival technique. Indian woman's subtext. She feels affection and empathy. She recognizes trauma instantly. Her physical touch expresses what language cannot. Expert woman's subtext. She tries to distract Rubin with information about the Iranians. She uses knowledge to reintroduce normalcy. Iranian Looties. Subtext. Their silence and body language show. We are dangerous men, but today we are your rescuers. Or scene building, creating place, atmosphere, and tension. A scene is not a location. It is an emotional container. Your scene shifts through several emotional temperatures. At oppression, inside the dark room. Claustrophobic, silent, heavy. To shock, Viktor and the Indian woman appear. Sudden light. Relief mixed with disbelief. Yin surrealism. Encountering the Iranian team. Cultural contrast, tattoos, scars, weapons, confusion, or greed and tension. The treasure scene. Men negotiating money. Ancient artifacts glowing in the dark. Uneasy alliances. 5. Relief and safety. The Tehran hospital. White lights. Sterile calm. A psychological exhale. The transitions are seamless because each new environment is presented through Rubin's psychological lens. That is masterful scene building. Always remember, a scene is defined not by walls but by emotional weather. 6. Why this passage is a goldmine for dialogue study. Your text demonstrates 5 essential dialogue principles. 1. The broken speak in fragments. Trauma removes grammar from the mind. 2. The rescuers speak in calming rhythms. Their role shapes their tone. 3. Exposition belongs only after emotional processing. 4. Cultural voices must differ in rhythm, not accent. The Iranians feel different without caricature. 5. Silence is often the most powerful line. Every single one of these principles is evident in your writing. 6. Practical technique breakdown. Let's dissect one moment to see how action, dialogue, and emotion blend. Rubin. My world is over. Just leave me here. Action. Collapsing, unable to walk. Emotion. Shame, despair. Viktor. It's all over now. Action. Lifting Rubin's arm. Emotion. Soothing, anchored confidence. Sound cue. Indian woman's scream. Function. Narrative pivot, emotional spark. Indian woman. Embraces him, touches his hair. Subtext. You are safe. You matter. Dialogue. Only one line. It's truly all over. Effect. Tenderness breaks the tension. This is a model of tight, efficient emotional engineering. And final exercise. Write a dialogue-only mini-scene. For your homework, Craft a short, dialogue-only scene in which two characters rescue a third. No narration, no description, no action beats, only spoken lines. The challenge is to imply fear, pain, environment, movement, and emotion through words alone. Study the economy of your passage. Let speech carry weight. Dialogue and scene building are not separate crafts. They are the left and right hands of storytelling. In your passage, the two are interwoven like nerves and bone. Speech rises from the body. The scene shapes the voice. Emotion drags language into new shapes. If you absorb the lessons hidden in Rubin's rescue, the silences, the tremors, the whispered reassurances, the cultural textures, the breath between words, you will begin to write dialogue that feels alive. Next session, we will study subtext-heavy conversations and how to make characters expose everything while saying almost nothing. The deeper you look, the more the page reveals.